There was a time when he walked like a storm wrapped in flesh. A time when people didn't just notice him, they felt him. His presence carried weight, intensity, a force that pressed into the room before he even stepped inside. He lived with a fire that had no limit, a hunger that refused to rest, a vision that blinded him to the comfort most people chased. Every breath tasted like purpose. Every morning felt like a battlefield waiting for him to conquer it. But life never attacks a strong man directly. It erodes him slowly, silently. It steals his fire in pieces so small he doesn't notice until the flame is almost gone. That's how it happened to him. First came the disappointments, the quiet ones, the ones he told himself didn't hurt. Then came the betrayals, delivered by hands he once held with trust. Responsibilities piled up like stones on his chest. Pressure wrapped around his ribs. The world demanded more from him than it ever gave back. He didn't break in one moment. He broke over years. The man who once moved with unstoppable force began drifting through his own life like a shadow. He stopped expecting good things. Stopped dreaming big. Stopped believing that he mattered in the story he was supposed to lead. He wasn't weak. He was tired, tired in a way sleep couldn't fix, tired in a way that carved hollowness into his soul. The fire that once roared became nothing more than a dim, struggling ember. Yet even in that darkness, something refused to die. Something ancient, stubborn, fierce. A memory of the man he used to be. A spark buried beneath the ashes, waiting for the right moment, to awaken and burn the world anew. A strong man never collapses in the open. His breaking happens beneath the surface, in places no one sees, in moments no one notices. The world thinks he is made of steel, but steel rusts when the storms never stop. And his storms never stopped. They came one after another: obligations, disappointments, silent sacrifices, nights where he had to hold himself together with nothing but sheer will. He carried burdens that would crush ordinary men, but because he never complained, everyone assumed he had infinite strength. They didn't notice the cracks forming. They didn't hear the tremor in his chest. They didn't see how the fire behind his eyes flickered every time he forced a smile. His breaking didn't look dramatic. It looked like long exhales, like tired steps, like staring at the floor for a few seconds longer than usual. It looked like losing interest in things he used to love. Like being present but absent. Like sitting in silence because he had run out of words, explanations, and energy to pretend. But when a strong man finally reaches his limit, the collapse is silent yet powerful, an earthquake without sound. The world around him shifts. People who depended on his strength suddenly feel the void. The energy in the air changes. The reality he once held together with his bare hands begins to unravel. No one realizes how much of life he kept balanced until the moment he stops. But that breaking, it wasn't an ending. It was the harsh beginning of a transformation only destiny could orchestrate. For when a man like him shatters, the universe doesn't bury him. It rebuilds him into something the world is not ready to face. Before a man rises into a new era, life tests him in ways that feel unfair, brutal, and deliberate. It strips him of everything familiar until he is forced to face himself without distractions. That is where he stood now, caught between the dying version of who he had been and the awakening force of who he was becoming. It was a transition no one warned him about, a silent metamorphosis where the world around him seemed to pull away, leaving him to walk alone. But that isolation wasn't punishment. It was preparation. Life removes people when their presence no longer aligns with a man's destiny. It breaks routines that keep him small. It shakes his beliefs, destroys his comfort, and pushes him into corners where he can't avoid the truth anymore. He had reached that stage, the crossroads where every weakness was exposed, every fear confronted, every illusion burned away. He felt the shift in subtle moments, the sudden clarity in his thoughts, the quiet confidence rising beneath the weight of his pain, the sense that something massive was building inside him. He no longer reacted to things that once controlled him. He no longer feared endings. He no longer clung to the past with trembling hands. The man he used to be was dissolving, not from failure but from evolution. His old identity could not survive the greatness he was moving toward. This transformation wasn't loud, it was calm, steady, unstoppable, like a tide returning to the shore. And somewhere deep within, beneath the scars, beneath the disappointments, beneath the exhaustion, he felt it. A new version of himself sharpening in the shadows, assembling piece by piece. A version he had forgotten. A version the world had not yet met. A version that would not bow again. The breaking point wasn't a sudden explosion, it was a slow descent into a place where nothing felt real anymore. A place where he moved through his days with a heavy quietness, where even breathing felt like effort. He didn't fall apart with screaming or rage. He didn't destroy things or slam doors. His breaking was quieter, colder, more painful than anything loud could ever be. It was the kind of collapse that only a strong man understands, the kind where he stops fighting because he's exhausted, not because he's defeated. In that painful stillness, he finally saw everything he had ignored for years. He saw how much of himself he had given to people who only took. He saw how many responsibilities he carried that were never his to bear. He saw the dreams he had buried under survival, the passions he abandoned to keep others comfortable, the strength he wasted on proving his worth to people unworthy of him. And for the first time, he admitted it to himself, he had been living on empty. But breaking has a strange power. It forces a man to confront the truth without filters, without excuses, without illusions. And in that raw honesty, he discovered something he had forgotten: he still had the ability to rebuild. Not the old version of himself, but something stronger, colder, more precise. He wiped his face, not to hide weakness but to acknowledge it. He lifted his head not because someone told him to, but because he chose to. The world expected him to stay down, to remain shattered, to walk around hollow. But they forgot one thing. A man who has survived his own breaking point becomes dangerous. Because he now knows exactly what must be destroyed. And exactly what must be reborn. Darkness never arrives all at once. It creeps in slowly, like a shadow stretching across the floor, inch by inch, until it covers everything. That was how it wrapped itself around him, not violently, not dramatically, but quietly, patiently. It entered through the small cracks life had carved into him over the years. Cracks made from exhaustion, heartbreak, betrayal, and silent disappointment. Cracks he pretended didn't exist. At first, the darkness felt almost comforting. It gave him a place to hide, a place where he didn't have to be strong, where he didn't have to explain himself, where no one expected anything from him. It whispered to him gently, telling him to rest, to let go, to stop fighting. The world outside was loud, demanding, unforgiving. The darkness offered silence. But silence can become a cage. The longer he stayed in it, the more it fed on him. Doubt became heavier. Regret became sharper. Fear became louder. Thoughts twisted into weapons that stabbed at him with every breath. The darkness tried to convince him that he wasn't enough, that he had failed, that everything around him was meaningless. It tried to drain the last spark inside him. But what the darkness didn't know was that buried deep within him was a stubborn fire, a flame that refused to die no matter how cold the world became. A flame born from every struggle he survived, every moment he kept going when quitting would have been easier. And in that suffocating darkness, that tiny flame began to flicker. Weak at first, but real. It pushed against the shadows. It reminded him of the man he once was, the man he could still become. The darkness tried to swallow it, but a spark that has tasted light cannot be erased. The darkness wasn't there to destroy him. It was there to reveal him. After surviving his own breaking point and facing the darkness that threatened to consume him, he began the slow, deliberate process of reclaiming himself. This wasn't a transformation born from superficial motivation or external pressure, it was a quiet, relentless drive that came from the depths of his soul, from every scar, every loss, and every moment he had felt powerless. He realized that the only person standing between him and the life he deserved was himself, and he refused to stay trapped any longer. Each day became a test of patience and discipline. He began to rebuild his routines, not as obligations, but as statements of his independence. He trained his body with purpose, not to impress anyone, but to honor his own strength. He sharpened his mind through reading, learning, and strategy, understanding that knowledge was a weapon and clarity a shield. He began to confront the fears he had buried, to stare at the discomfort that had once paralyzed him, and to push forward regardless. The reclamation wasn't only physical or mental, it was emotional. He learned to hold his ground without arrogance, to express himself without apology, to feel deeply without dependency. He set boundaries that were unyielding but fair, understanding that protecting his energy was not selfish, it was necessary. He stopped bending to the whims of others and started living according to his own rules, his own pace, his own standards. Every step, no matter how small, reminded him that power wasn't given, it was earned. He felt the spark of his old self returning, stronger, calmer, and more precise than ever. And with each day, he moved closer to becoming a man who could walk through life unshaken, unapologetic, and unstoppable. The warrior inside him had never truly disappeared, he had only been buried under years of silence, responsibility, and wounds he didn't have time to heal. But when life strips a man down to nothing, when it pushes him to the point where he has to choose between staying broken or rising again, something ancient wakes up inside him. Something that had been sleeping with one eye open. He felt that awakening first in his breath, slow, heavy, steady. Then in his spine, as if the weight he had been carrying began to shift, allowing him to stand a little straighter. His eyes sharpened, not with anger, but with clarity. The kind of clarity only pain can create. He didn't rise with noise. He didn't rise with rage. He rose quietly, like a storm rebuilding itself in the distance, gaining power without needing to announce it. The warrior returning in him was not reckless like before. He wasn't driven by ego, or pride, or the desire to prove anything to anyone. This version of him was forged in suffering, carved by heartbreak, perfected by solitude. His silence became sharper than weapons. His presence heavier than threats. His calm more terrifying than anger. People around him felt the shift even if they couldn't explain it. They saw it in the way he walked, firm, deliberate, unapologetic. They heard it in the tone of his voice, steady, controlled, unquestionable. They sensed it in his energy, no longer seeking approval, no longer asking for understanding, no longer dimming himself to keep the peace. What they didn't know was this. A man who has rebuilt himself from ashes doesn't return as who he was. He returns as who he was always meant to become. A warrior not created by the world, but sharpened by surviving it. When a man rebuilds himself from the ground up, the world notices, but not immediately. The shift is subtle at first, almost imperceptible, like the moment dawn begins to bleed over the horizon. His steps carry a new weight, a deliberate rhythm that makes people unconsciously adjust around him. His gaze, once searching for approval or validation, now holds a quiet command that demands attention without demand. He moves through life not as someone who reacts, but as someone who shapes the space he occupies. Every action, every word, every glance carries intention, and the energy that surrounds him begins to feel magnetic, almost gravitational. People try to measure him. They try to predict him. They fail. The man they knew, the one who was easily shaken, easily bent, easily broken, no longer exists. In his place is someone who refuses to be defined by anyone, someone whose standards cannot be negotiated, whose boundaries are unbreakable, whose presence is the reward itself. He doesn't need to convince anyone of his worth, it emanates naturally. He no longer chases, no longer over-explains, no longer sacrifices himself to earn fleeting attention. Those who once held power over him feel it slipping, a subtle shift in the balance they cannot counter. And women, in particular, sense something rare, a man whose life, his mind, his fire, exist independently of anyone else, and whose attention is earned, not given. This emergence is not loud or flamboyant. It is quiet, disciplined, and relentless. It is a force unseen until it moves, a calm so powerful it unsettles the complacent, and a presence so grounded it draws loyalty, respect, and desire without a single word. The man who emerges now does so fully aware, his energy is scarce, his heart selective, and his path unstoppable. By the time he reached this stage, everything had changed. The man who had once been buried beneath doubt, chaos, and the world's expectations had finally risen into his own. He no longer sought validation from anyone, nor did he chase fleeting approval. His worth was internal, unshakable, and undeniable. Women, and the world around him, could sense this immediately. His energy was no longer ordinary, it was magnetic, gravitational, a force that drew attention without effort. It wasn't arrogance or ego, it was certainty, a grounded presence that spoke louder than words ever could. He didn't over-explain. He didn't beg. He didn't apologize for existing. He moved with a calm authority that unsettled yet intrigued, that commanded respect without demanding it. Every glance, every word, every pause carried weight. Women who had once tested him, challenged him, or pulled away now found themselves leaning in, drawn to a man who didn't react to their moods but responded with a measured intensity they couldn't ignore. They felt safe, yet electrified, appreciated, yet challenged, drawn, yet made to work for his attention. And in that magnetic tension, attraction became inevitable, not forced, not manipulated, but earned. He had become a man who could love without losing himself, who could care without becoming dependent, who could remain present without collapsing under pressure, and who could walk away without regret when respect was absent. This balance was rare, irresistible, and unforgettable. He no longer tried to be the bad boy, he simply existed as the man the world could not control, the man who followed his own rules, protected his peace, and commanded his life. This was the man women chase. The man who leaves a lasting imprint. The man who will never be forgotten.